Hey guys, I'm Mike and welcome to my Flowscape tutorial. Flowscape is a 3D painting program, a sandbox program where you basically paint with 3D models and meshes. It's a super neat tool. It's fairly robust given that it only costs 10 bucks. The community is growing and there's a lot of questions, and I don't think anyone's made a full comprehensive video for beginners, so that's what this is designed to be. But if you mess around with the program, you use this tutorial, and you have more pointed, specific questions, leave them below in the comments, and maybe I'll make a video. I'm also going to do a video where I make a big, elaborate castle-type city, and we'll really get into some of the kind of more intricate details of the scaling and height and object placement and stuff. But I am going to cover every single button and every single basic function in this program in this tutorial. So hopefully you load up the program and listen to me jabber on. We're going to start in the top left-hand corner. This is obviously just the regular menu. You can save, I believe you can save 3 pages now. I am using Flowscape that was released on July 4th, 2019, version 1.3. I will update this video as the program is updated. You're going to need to have more patience, I think, than you do with most 3D painting and kind of art products, because this is just a single developer program, largely. I mean, I'm sure the guy hires out a little bit of this work, but it's 10 bucks, and it is updated fairly frequently, and it works really, really well for what it is. So certainly don't have $1 million expectations, but it's great for 10 bucks for what it is. In the settings, you'll find the camera speed option here. You'll notice that I am moving a little bit faster than the default. The default is a little bit slow for me. So change your camera speed, and if you want to get sick, turn up your camera rotation speed, and you're all familiar with that. This question mark will answer a lot of your questions and has some advanced information, how to place objects on top of each other and things like that, which some people will find very helpful. But let's get into it. Now, for this tutorial, I am going to, I should probably we'll just start right here. Okay, and we'll get into the top bar as we start placing objects, but the first thing we're going to need to do is select a terrain. So that's this third button from the bottom, and I'm just going to select a big square. There are all sorts of terrains, and they're not limited just to this look. We can change the scale and the textures on top. We can even sculpt them to a certain degree. So you're really just looking for the most basic fundamental elements of your design. Does it have water? Is it an island? That sort of thing. Those things would be harder to adjust on the fly with this program. So you can really modify all of these to a huge degree. So once you select your terrain, you're going to need to go to this 4 square button right here. It's going to allow you to do a couple things. The first is going to be your terrain type. Now notice when I'm clicking on it, because my default terrain was very low to the ground, it doesn't have that. This height button is very important. Notice that as you change the elevation, it actually changes what's possible in terms of, like, there's a rock layer here. This is all, no matter what you do here, it's going to be this rocky layer, and then up here has got your different textures will affect it. So terrain height is important. If you're finding that you need more water or less water, or you want more snow on your peaks, or what have you. This whole 3D environment is sort of broken out by altitude, and there's a big middle band here that is just whatever you put on it, and it will be unaffected. And there's a lot of masks and things that you can turn on and off, but this is super important. So height is something you're going to want to pay attention to. Tiling is going to, the textures are very high resolution, but the more that they're tiled, the greater the illusion of size. So if we turn the tiling all the way up, you can see that it looks like we didn't even change the size. We can make this thing really big if we want, but even with a fairly small map, we can give the illusion of an enormous size just by changing the the tiling. The Fresnel is, I believe that is the reflective quality of the water. I'll double check that later. This has to do with your peaks and your snow. And paint and sculpt we'll get into. That's a more advanced thing. We'll get into that once we get some stuff on the ground. So let's pick a terrain. We have a couple things here. We can pick ground one. There's a mask laying over this thing. So we'll use this straw type things. We'll just paint some trees and some woods. And then ground two is built in. You can see with the two different things that there's a mask over this. So you can go to the mask and actually change, you know, the dark parts are 1 or 2, and then the light parts are 1 or 2, and they kind of blend into each other. So you can mess with that and change the mask. And this is all stuff that I would do right off the bat. Brightness is fairly obvious. It's not your reflective light. All of the light controls are under the camera. They're not under the sky. You could make vast changes to lighting. Really, really, really impressive and important changes. And this dice roller is just a randomizer. Okay, so now you've got your landscape selected, and maybe you want to modify it a little bit. To do that, you would need the sculpt tool, and you have to appreciate that the sculpt tool is in its infancy, and it only works in these sort of how do I say, just cylindrical slices based on brush size. So as you sculpt and draw the land up, you're just doing it in these sort of spherical things. So it's not necessarily the most powerful tool. I mean, it's certainly no substitute for ZBrush, but you can definitely, with enough patience and kind of create something interesting here. One thing that I do like is that when you pull up to a max, it does fit the brush. So if you wanted to get some sharp edges, you can, which is good. And you can also, there's also rock tools that will kind of allow you to build like this, but I don't know of anything that would let you build. You could really build a step-tiered landscape fairly easily. But the sculpt tool is still, I think, kind of in its infancy. And what you have to go along with the sculpt tool is that the paint tool will allow you to. Now, I believe that it was designed to paint paths, like if you had like a little, little like walking path sort of thing. But you can use the sculpt tool to kind of paint and render the sides of your creations so that they don't look like the ground cover necessarily. You know, if you want to turn it into cobblestone or what have you. Okay, so that's enough on the sculpt tool. It's one of the more intricate things, and it probably deserves its own video to really show you how to create something. But I want to keep this thing under an hour, if at all possible. So those are all the things inside the terrain tool. This is your eraser. You can erase multiple ways. Let's just put down a tree and I'll show you the different ways that you can erase. So we have a tree. If you just put down a single object like that, you can hit the backspace key and delete it. Or you can use the eraser tool and delete right on top of it. Now the eraser tool does not erase your sculpting. For erasing sculpting, you actually have to just sculpt it in the opposite direction. You have to push it back down. So it's a little bit trickier, I suppose, to erase. Now, when placing objects, the first thing you need to look at is up here. This is super important. This is your grow slider. It's the speed at which things grow. So that's what it looks like if it's about in the middle. If it's at the bottom, boom. Get a nice long time. This is the flow control, and I will actually get into that later. This is the size of the actual objects, and it is related to the variation of the objects. So if we say that there's no variation and huge size, then everything we put down is basically going to be the max that it can possibly be via the random generator. If we say there's tons of variation and we painted a bunch of trees, we got a couple huge trees and we got a couple teeny tiny baby trees. I'm just using the backspace key to undo. And along with the size variation, you also have this, which is the angle. And as you can see, you'll get them growing in different directions. And you can also use this right here, this button. These buttons are some of the most important, and there's some that I don't see people use, and it's super, super, super important. So when placing objects, if you want to align to the terrain, all right, if you click it on and you align to the terrain, and then you place an object on that terrain, it is going to, it will basically grow at a tangent to the angle of the terrain that it's on. See, it grew right there. It's right at a tangent, at a 90-degree tangent. So all of these are going to be in different directions. And while that might not be great or make a ton of sense for trees, there are certainly objects, plants, buildings, even pieces of buildings. And you have this right here. This is the angle at which a building snaps to something. So there's a lot of tools to prevent you from using this. This is your movement, direction, and scale tool. And it is I find that it's most useful when placing buildings and objects. So a note on the trees, you can select any of these things, and then the mouse wheel will change the brush angle or the brush size. Now I just clicked here to turn this back on so that everything goes straight. The way that oh, by the way, you can also point at an object like this. And click delete with the eraser tool. So anyways, back to trees. So the larger the area, this does not affect the size of the tree whatsoever. That's all taken care of up here. What it does do is it's a radius for where trees will grow. So if you want to create a whole bunch of, it's sort of scattered palm array, we'll turn the size variation on and And now we get a whole bunch of different trees, and they're growing at different angles because this slider is up. If I take those out, and then I take that slider and leave it down here, they all grow at perfectly straight up and down, which is really important. Adjusting these sliders is going to be is a big part of creating a convincing scene. You also have, well, we'll get to this button right here in just a second. The plants work exactly the same. The bushes, the flowers, all of these things, you just select the one that you want, you select the radius that you want them to grow, the angle, the size variation, and you just keep playing until you paint them in, and you erase a couple and you paint them in, and then you individually erase a couple. It's very fun. It's quick, it's meditative. And I believe that was probably the original intent of the program, but since it's such a powerful tool, it's expanded into the D&D community and to the two-dimensional art community. I use it. I'm a painter and a two-dimensional artist and a concept artist and a character designer and blah, blah, blah. But I use it I'll create landscapes and then photo bash pieces of them in. I use it as a perspective tool. I use it as just a color idea generation tool. And you'll see how I do that inside the camera. I'll explain thoroughly all of the different settings of the camera, which are very, very, very important. And I feel like many novice people who aren't artists are just going to sort of move the sliders around and see the effect. But if you understand what they do, they can really, really, really help you create a better thing that you're trying to create. So an important neat trick here is that all of this ground clutter, the mushrooms, leaves, shells, some of these rocks are extremely big. All this little stuff that's over here, this stuff, it uses the physics of the world. It just drops them out of the sky, which can be great. But if you want to place one really big of these rocks for some reason, right? You can click this button, and instead of it, here, let's unclick it. Instead of it dropping it out of the sky like this, you can click here, and then it will grow out of the ground. It's supposed to. I'm not sure why it's not. It's working for that. So here with the logs, they are growing out of the ground, or you can unclick it and it will drop them out of the sky and they will kind of lay naturally. So this scale tool can be used on just about anything. I find you'll most often use it on buildings and the sort of larger man-made things, but I'm going to test it out on this stick here. So this top one is just to move, and it works in kind of a bizarre way. You have to grab the arrow that you want. Say you want to move on which plane you want. There's X, Y, and Z planes. You can move it in 3 planes because we're in 3 dimensions. So grab the dimension that you want, hold, and then drag it either direction. Now it doesn't matter if you drag it under the ground like this, because you can just grab this and drag it right up. And you can have objects floating in the sky, and while it might not make a lot of sense outside of like a Mortal Kombat map to have them floating in the air, you can have floating rocks and create some really interesting fantasy landscapes with this program. And I will I'll show you how to do that with some neat style in a later video when I create a castle landscape with I'm going to do kind of a floating tiered castle island in the sky type thing, and I'll be showing you how to make things float and light it and take cool pictures for whatever it is that you want to use it for. So that's all the ground clutter. There are some bigger pieces here. There are some super chunky rock outcroppings that as you click, you'll see there's a bunch of different styles and grows. And Here's a cool limestone chunk. I like these. These are great for either sort of desert Egyptian type scenes, or this program really shines in the medieval. There are these jagged things. You can create kind of a, I forget what that zone is in the Burning Crusade, but there's that big rocky sort of jagged outcropping thing up in the sky, and you could really create some impressive high resolution stuff. And you've got all these sort of random larger formation generators. And this one is brand new. You can actually take these big snowy mountains so that you don't have to necessarily change your terrain height. And for some objects, when you have if you look here, when you have this blue circle when you click, that means that it's just going to randomly generate something in this radius. When you grab an object and it brings the actual object, that means that there's more than one of those and you get to select. And you can scroll through these with your mouse wheel. And then once you place them, let's get an object that sort of fits with this a little bit. The color's not right, but here. Once we grab this, we can grab our move tool. And let's move it down and over, and then we'll grab it this way. Move it down here and down. Okay. Now, this works the same way as the other tool. You just grab which plane you want to rotate, and you can rotate it in all 360 degrees. And then this one is your scale tool, which will allow you can smush it, or you can drag it in any direction and make it as big or as weird as you want. And in incorporating these big scalable rock features with the building pieces, you can really create some organic, fantasy, fantastic, amazing things. The only problem is that the textures and colors aren't going to match perfectly, but with like a little bit of Photoshop, you can really have a great base, a great three-dimensional, properly lit base for your fantasy painting or whatever. It's such a cool, powerful tool. Now the building tool works just like what we went over, only there are a lot of buildings. Now, pay very close attention. A lot of times you're going to get these huge buildings and wonder why you have to always scale them down. Set your size and your variation low and your size to whatever you want, and then that way when you grab a building, each one of them will be scaled completely evenly depending on your settings up here. That's why I stress that these settings up top are super important. And you just have different sort of archetypes and periods of time. You have a big collection of sort of medieval town buildings. These are all castle pieces, and they are designed to be fit together to make something new and interesting. They are designed to be scaled and rotated and smashed together and smushed so that you can create, your vision. And there's a lot of these sort of half pieces and pieces of walls, and there's bridges, and there's various types of ground. You can use the paint path tool to create cobblestone ground and sort of dirt paths and grounds for castles, or there are I believe the wooden boards are in here. Fire is brand new. You can create smoke and fire. See? I don't know how much you can scale that. Did I just break it? I probably did. I haven't touched the fire yet. So here are a couple of ground pieces that you can use for the inside of churches and paths, and there's a huge number of things that you can use to make something cool. The placeable lights are neat, although they're crazy powerful. And over time, they keep just adding more and more little bits. A little bit more sophisticated fantasy type stuff. Back off on that, and as you can see, the slider has an absolutely massive effect on how far they're scaled. I don't know, I guess this is Tudor style, I suppose. Kind of a Germanic type city. Let's see, but we really need to. If you want to see them, here we go. You can really build full-on, you know, cities. In the hillside, put steps and paths, and there's a great selection of Japanese, or I guess this is probably like, this is more Chinese than Japanese. Sort of pagoda. That says Japanese to me. Or maybe I'm an idiot. I don't know. See, and the interesting thing is you can take this and you can, you know, scale it in any direction. Create really interesting designs that, you know, now it doesn't read quite as sort of traditional. I mean, it's still Asian, but it's not, I suppose, as Asian. Get it down on the ground, and then you can build buildings around this thing and create an edifice that didn't exist before, which is really, really helpful. And there are ships now and all sorts of boats. So all in all, it's an amazing tool. This sort of reminds me of Bavaria. If these houses had solar panels on them, you could just go find them in Germany right now. And then another set of cathedral and castle style stuff. These are the animals. They all have a bit of a different behavior. You know, if you let a bird go, it just sort of it just flies. But if you place, let's just say, foxes. They're actually, there are a couple different styles of each animal, and they do move and have some behavior, but it's not full on, like it's not, they're not going to interact with the environment. The animations are very limited, and you can see them with these fantasy creatures here, which is this bottom button. All of these fantasy creatures will show you their animations, and whatever they do right here in this brief few seconds is all they're going to do. They're not going to march around or do anything beyond sort of what you see here. It's just sort of a static, just something to give your landscape flavor. I would love it if you could import meshes. This tool would become extremely, extremely powerful, but I don't know that that is coming anytime soon. So this next button is selecting a sky. There are two styles of sky. On this right hash, we have all of these sort of traditional skies that you can rotate and move, and you can change the sun and all sorts of stuff. And then on this side, you have these huge panoramic images that slowly rotate, and you can rotate them, and then you can push. See how it's slowly rotating? You can toggle it and then hold it into position so you can take a photograph. If you somehow build your landscape like this into one of these three-dimensional photos. I have not found a great use for these. I thought this was the Cliffs of Moher in Ireland, but it's not. I don't know. If I had to guess, I would probably call that looks like Ireland to me, but who knows? So anyways, you can use these super high-res photos if you like to build them into your backdrop, or you can use these traditional skies, which is what I'm going to use. I'm going to use sort of this dusky sky like this, and then most of how your image is going to look once you have the stuff built is going to be in the settings here. So if we look at this, when you check sun or moon, this is how you change it from a sun to a moon, because even in this sort of dusky sky, you can very easily turn it to night. So with the rotation of the sky, you are not affecting the location of the sun or the moon. You are just affecting the image in the background. Direction, you are affecting the 3D circle that your sun or moon is in. And then height, this is sort of like, this is a circle above and around you. It's three-dimensional. And then height is two-dimensional. It's just on this one vertical plane where you are going to be. Now, intensity is going to be how much this light, the color of this light, and temperature, everything about this light, whatever you set this light to be, intensity is going to directly affect and change how much it lights these surfaces. Now, it may look like this yellow sun now, but if we just change the temperature, we can make it red or white or blue or whatever we want. We can really, really, really color and tie together the images with the temperature control. It's almost like a color blending tool, but the intensity is just so high. Lens flare is for when you are facing the camera or in some direction. I'm about to cough. Just getting over a cold. So we did sky rotation, we did lens flare, ambient light. Ambient light is a calculation based on, all right, if we turn the intensity way down and the ambient light way down, our surfaces are not reflective at all. Ambient light is sort of like bounce light, but it's not so sophisticated that it's not calculating it necessarily in a real way. There are other physics engines that would do this in a more subtle way, and probably it would be like if we turn intensity down, watch how ambient light affects like everything, right? It's the bounce light, but it's sort of like a global calculation. So it's very simple. When we turn up ambient light, we should see some spots brighter than others, but we don't have that. Which is okay. It's just a limitation of the tool. And intensity, notice that it is all planes. The intensity is only affecting planes that are facing the sun, your main light source. The planes like, well, here, let's go back here. There is no sun to the back of this, right? And when we turn up the intensity, we do not see any change. So it's all those physical planes. This is such a good tool if you're learning how to paint too. And although I don't necessarily agree with all of the lighting changes that it makes, I don't think that real light behaves exactly like that. You get all these weird bounce lights and secondary lights, and the shadows are the shadow colors are definitely not so even in real life, but it's still amazing. It's amazing to see, which ones of these planes of these rocks are affected and which aren't. I think it's awesome. So sky brightness should be fairly self-evident. You can turn any sky to black if you turn the brightness all the way down, and it won't go all the way to white, so it's got a little bit of a limit. Fog is there's two different ways to look at it. What is the best use that I have seen for fog is that you can create forced perspective. You can push this thing sort of way into the background with fog. if you add a little bit of fog, the items in the distance will be affected, and the more you add, its calculation is based on distance, right? So notice that there's no fog here, right? We'll turn this down. Now we'll go over here. And we'll turn on the fog, and you can see that it is over here. Why is that? Because the fog is just based on distance from the camera point, from the lens point, which can be super helpful. It can be super helpful because it lightens everything, and then you can actually adjust the color that it lightens things, which is super neat. So play with that, and ground fog will obviously create fog closer to the camera. Camera field of view. This is probably I don't know. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be 180 degrees or what exactly it's supposed to be, but the lower your field of view, the more you are going to zoom and the less that you can see. Think of it like a camera lens. You know, the higher the millimeters, the more you can see a narrower view closer. And it is actually useful, like say if you wanted to take a zoomed in picture from here and frame that thing out, you may get a better shot like this than if you walked up to it. So it's just this is one of the few actual camera tools, I would call it. The exposure works just like Photoshop. White balance is going to change the temperature of your image, but there's also a temperature control, so just fidget with both. Saturation is the amount of, basically if you remove saturation, it's going to be black and white. This is super useful to do this, to see your values, to see how your image reads. If you were wondering whether or not those mountains in the background really are light enough, put the saturation to 0 so you can tell. This is a trick that artists use. If you turn saturation all the way up, all the colors are going to move into the far corner of the color picker, and it's going to be gross. Or cartoony, and you may want that. For happier, goofier scenes, you may want to increase the saturation. For more mood, maybe decrease it. Vignette is going to create a haze around the outside so that you can focus here. So if you turn up the vignette, you will see that there's a sort of circular mask that goes around the outside. Here, everything is equal color. Bloom is basically changing the reflective amount of the reflected surfaces. So if light is bouncing off of them, and you can do this. So notice that bloom is directly tied to intensity. You can have a low intensity and a high. We need to have some intensity, I suppose. And this is just super, super, super subtle. And then if you turn up the intensity, a lot of bloom is just crazy. And that certainly could be useful for something. Oh, bloom threshold. I guess I was under the threshold here. So if we turn the threshold all the way down, it will bloom on just about anything. And if we turn it all the way up, you're also going to have to turn the intensity up to get any kind of bloom whatsoever. So very interesting. Aperture is a camera setting. It's the focal length. So if you aperture low like this, the foreground is going to be out of focus. And then as you go up, I wonder if we can even make the I mean, I think that from a camera perspective, aperture is actually the amount of light let in by the camera. Right? Or is aperture shutter speed? No, shutter speed is shutter speed. I don't know. It'll make different parts of your image in and out of focus. And you can set the focal distance, which is like turning the little knobs on your digital camera. The headphones are the sound settings, which obviously I have off, and I'm not going to demonstrate because it will be really, really annoying to you, I think. A couple tricks with the camera. You could just push this button right here and it'll take a picture and put it into your Flowscape folder, or you can hit F8 and take an 8K picture of your landscape, or if you're in the map maker mode, you can take a 2K, a 4K, or an 8K. A lot of the D&D community is using the map maker mode for something, I don't know. My wife plays D&D on Saturdays, and I don't know what they do there. It's just not my thing. I ruin things. So I was not invited. And if I was invited, I wouldn't have gone. So maybe that's why I wasn't invited. Anyways, no offense to the D&D community. I know many D&D players, but I'm not sure exactly what they use this for. I'm using this program primarily for 2D art stuff, but it's such an amazing tool. And if they give us the ability to import meshes, I'm going to make like a 3-dimensional motion comic in world-class speed time. There's so many things I would love to do with this tool if it was expanded some, simply because it would afford me to do it quickly. And that's about the only way I can do things, because making a living arting is rough. Speaking of which, I need to get back to work. If you have questions, comments, concerns, or you just want me to make videos really diving into any specific tool, I would love to do that. Just leave a comment and I will do so. I'm going to immediately delete this weird wonderland of oddity, and I'm going to go paint. So have fun using this tool. Support the guy who makes it. He seems super nice, and this tool is fantastic. I have a video up right now of me using it to make 2-dimensional art, if that's your thing. I did a Daredevil piece with it. I used some of the church pieces, and later this week I will post the video of me making a floating medieval castle, and then hopefully by that time some of you have asked some interesting questions, and I will address those in much shorter videos. So good day, good art. Thanks for watching. Take care.